impact do you want to make on the world? Good question. And here's the test. And Sarah, you're gonna love this because it's gonna fit right where we're going. Ask my question, clients, what's the second line of their obituary? The first line of your obituary says, so-and-so died at this age, at this location. Second line usually says, mother of 3 leaves behind, blah, blah, blah. Child-free folks, what's that second line? I've actually spent a lot of time reflecting on this for myself, and I've reworded it times, but I said, okay, say loving husband, world traveler, author, and innovator. Well, those are my targets right now. By the way, those will probably shift. Like, what's that second line of your obituary say? And when you ask people that question, they go, I have no freaking clue. And I'm like, cool, let's figure that out.
Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast, hosted by Sarah Lawrence, Berenice Smith, and me, Michael Hughes, where we, with all our special guests, explore what it means to be childless and hope we can help you feel validated, seen and inspired, and in turn help you navigate this very different life to the one we thought we were going to have. This episode, we continue on with last episode's ageing theme, and we are joined by Dr. Jay Zigmont, a researcher and financial advisor specialising in those who live and age without children. As we know, our situation is not the same as the general population, and so how we manage our finances for the now and later in life is vitally important. But let's let Dr. Jay tell us more.
Welcome to the Full Stop, Jay. It's lovely to have you with us.
Happy to join you. Now we have the time right. I mean, that's all that matters.
Yeah, apologies for that. We will...
Yeah. Can I say you're looking pretty fresh for very early in the morning too?
You know, I got up. It's 4:30 in the morning, and do what I got to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
you all like had weird time zones between the three of you. Like I forget what it was. It was just this is the latest appointment you had was like 5 o'clock in the morning is what I had down.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, because it's 10:30 in the UK. Michael, it's something quite late with you. So yeah, we have to sort of sit in the middle. We don't tend to do a great deal of recordings with guests in the US because they're like, oh, yeah, and we understand that. So we honour and recognise that. And thank you very much for joining us so early in the morning as well. We appreciate it. Okay.
Right. Deep breath.
Deep breath.
Yeah. So welcome. Thank you for joining us, Jay. I was wondering if you could start by introducing yourself because people may not be familiar with who you are and what you do.
So I'm Jay, also go by Dr. Jay. I am the I'm the founder of Child Free Wealth and the author of 2 books, The Portrait of Child Free Wealth and the upcoming book, The Child Free Guide to Life and Money. My work's all around the life and financial planning for people who are child free or permanently childless. So we're not talking about people that don't have kids for a weekend, but what happens to your life and finances when you're never going to have kids?
So what sort of, what do you notice? Because my background's actually financial services. What do you notice is the key difference? What is it that drove you to set it up? You must have noticed something in the difference. I
jokingly say I started this because I'm a researcher by nature. Both my wife and our PhDs. And I started the question about are we weird? Are we weird because we're child free? Kind of like, we're weird anyway. We'll sit around the dinner table and talk about research studies. That's a little weird. But are we weird because we're child free? And come to find out, not really in the child free population, but in the whole population, maybe. And the way we say it is living the life of child free wealth means you have time, money, and freedom to do what you enjoy, but it doesn't necessarily make you rich. There's no magic checks that come from the sky when you're child free. But that time, money, and freedom means you're living a different life script. So you're not doing the standard go to school, get married, buy a house, 25 years, retire. You're doing something different, and most of my clients don't really have a goal of passing on money to the next generation. So if you don't really want to pass on money to the next generation, there's a point where you actually have too much money. Most of them don't want to retire in the classical model. They want to cut back on work. They know they have to have a plan for long-term care. And there's so much more flexibility that it's hey, we have a great plan, but I just got a job offer in Korea and I'm going to move there in 2 months. You're okay, that's just a random thing that happens with our clients. So everything in finance starts shifting because you have a different outcome and different flexibility.
So do you tend to see people then that have perhaps a bit more wealth? Because I think, I work with people that perhaps don't have as much wealth, even though they are childless. Is that your kind of demographic? Is that the sort of people you tend to see? Is people that have perhaps got a little bit more?
You serve people with a little bit more. There's a study just came out a month ago, or a couple months ago now. Pew Research looked at net worth, and they did find that child-free folks have a higher net worth. Interesting, we're doing some research working with Michigan State University. Childless folks tend to have a little more debt, which is kind of interesting, but some of that is, from fertility debt, other things. But one of the more interesting data points coming out of the Pew Research, at least in the US, is that income disparities almost disappear between the genders when you're child-free. So if you look at the income gap between men and women that are child-free, it's less than it was a couple $100 difference, where with parents, it's thousands of dollars. So it's not necessarily that they have a higher net worth in total, because that's not a goal, but it does change the way money comes in and the way they use it.
I wonder if I'm thinking that if there's a difference. One of the differences might be that if one chooses not to have children, then there might be a financial plan. Whereas with childlessness, or people that are thrown into this state of not being a parent, there's a degree of perhaps, I know my feelings were, I have fertility debt to start with, but also it's kind of just trying to ignore that, or you don't have a plan for it. There isn't a plan, because actually everything that you saved up for, you no longer have, because you are told you can't be a parent, and it wasn't something that you'd ever accounted for. And I'm wondering if people that choose to not be a parent have a different approach to it, because it's perhaps maybe part of their goal in life. Therefore, they've made those savings, and they have a forecast, if you like, a different intention with their life. That's the word I'm looking for, and a different intention with their life, perhaps, to those who are childless, not by choice.
Yeah, so we picked to use the word child-free for the company just because you got to pick a word. I mean, because having it no parent, people who don't have kids and aren't planning on kids, wealth just doesn't work. But we work with both child-free and childless folks, and I was at the Childless Collective Summit about a year ago now, and doing a whole bunch of meeting with childless folks. And one of the interesting things I found is that for a lot of folks that are either going through the grieving process, still going through it, they're not ready to imagine a new life. They're not ready to imagine new finances. They're not ready. And that's okay. Like, that's not a judgment at all, but you have to get to a point where you're like, okay, here is the next chapter of my life. You are probably right. For the child-free folks, this was the chapter they picked. So it is a different. On the financial side, at least in the US, we find that if you want to move up the ladder as far as career, the best answer is to move jobs every 2 or 3 years. Well, child-free people can do that. My wife and I, we embrace something called the Gardener Rose, where one's growing, one's providing support. My wife got offered a job 1,200 miles away. We packed up the dogs and cats and we went. Like, it's not a big deal. Now, if you're still trying to conceive, you're still debating it, you still want to stay near your family, you want to there's a lot to it. It's not just like one thing. Like, just the choice makes the difference. But I think it's a complex reflection of the life we're living. And I do think there's something to that fertility debt that sets people behind, and there's a lot of weight that comes with that debt. Having worked with people working through that, I mean, there's just baggage. It's part of the grieving process, part of the structure. And until you get past it, whatever that means for you, you can't grow in the same way. And I think you're probably right. There probably is something to that intentionality. But to be honest, we don't have enough research about it. We're still trying to figure out what percentage of the U.S. is child-free versus childless.
Yeah, that's true. It's a complicated thing, isn't it? Because there is that perception that I've picked up on, whether it's, I think it's true, given all the things that we're hearing currently coming out of the US, that there is a judgment. And society, I think sometimes my feeling is, oh, you must have more money because you don't have kids. It's different money. I think that's it. I don't see myself as being rich in the least, but it's different money. But sometimes that perception can, I don't know, maybe sometimes you can sort of rebel against it and go, look, just stop with the kind of like freedom because you don't have kids chat, because actually that's quite insulting. It's a different way of living and a different way of using or dealing and tackling with money.
Yeah, I'd argue that it's not better or worse. It's just different, And yeah, you're right. We're right now in a political season, and the childless cat ladies and all the other things in the U.S. and the politics, like it's just ridiculous. The number we use, a study out of Michigan found that about 21% of adults over 18 chose not to have kids, so be child free, and another about 5.5% were childless not by choice. So we're really talking about 26% of the population. But you're right, the judgments, all that. I mean, it's bad. I'm in the south of the U.S., and the way that you meet people, they say the first two questions are, "Where's your church home?" and "How many kids do you have?" And like that's just every time, and it's like, all right, well, I'm not going to answer either of those. Let's start with that. But there's all these judgments that come with it. I mean, my firm, as far as we know, is the first firm to serve child-free folks, and the amount of hate we get on social media and people just making judgments, it's just ridiculous. The amount of people in the U.S. praying for my soul because we don't have kids and we're serving the childless. Forget it. But there's just like assumption that you're rich because you don't have kids, because you don't have the $18,000 a year it costs to have kids. Well, if your goal is not to pass that money to the next generation, your goal is not to have the highest net worth in the world, you don't actually. Like, that's not a goal. And it ends up changing a lot of things. But there's just this, I saw one other on social media. Well, you're child free, you can't be tired. Well, no, I can still be tired. Okay. Like seriously, like it's all this baggage that comes with it. And I don't know how it is where you are, but at least in the US right now, it's such a hot button that you got to be careful how you talk about it.
Yeah, it's definitely migrated over here. For sure. There's an awful lot of support, I think, in this country, and pushback against this narrative that, childless cat ladies have no worth. We're seeing it a lot on social media here. But yeah, there is that baggage for sure. And yeah, you're right. I think the narrative is changing a little bit around perhaps what people ask. But I think it's often those question openers. Sometimes it's kind of who you hang out with, but sometimes you can't avoid hanging out with people that just don't necessarily have that awareness to ask better questions as well.
I think, Jay, I think you made a really good observation there around people perhaps changing their direction if they find out that they perhaps can't have children, or it's a slow realization, or just that shift in values once they come through the grief. I know from my own perspective, I went from working in financial services, I'm now a counsellor, and I earn a fraction of what I was earning. And I think there's a stage in the process, perhaps more so for childless people rather than child-free, whereby you reevaluate. Do you see that very often? Do you see people sort of reevaluating and then sort of that reduction in their net value and what they're going after in terms of their finances?
And it's not 100% dollar for dollar or, an exact number, but the way we do it is we try to do life planning first, then financial planning. So we're like, okay, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? What do you want to do in the next chapter of life? What do you want your impact to be? Because, if you're not going to have a genetic legacy, you need to figure out what do you want your legacy to be? Now, it doesn't have to be giant. That's one of the other misnomers. It's kind of like, because you don't have kids, you have to like go up the ladder and be the best. No, like you can have the best garden in the world for all I care. But what are your priorities? And what happens is we have an approach we call financial independence, live early. So rather than retiring, it's kind of dialing back and going, do I really want to do that job? So we have the Child for Wealth podcast, and one of our top download episodes is I'll make you quit your job. Because like, look, if you hate your job, you can move, go somewhere that you enjoy. You could, go open that cupcake shop. You can interesting, you talk about counseling. I have a lot of therapists, a lot of counselors, a lot of librarians for some reason. I don't know, a lot of authors, book people, but whatever. Like, not necessarily jobs making a lot of money, but just good jobs. I enjoy it. And I can cut back when I want, and I can travel, I can do different things. And it's just that awareness that I don't need to follow that standard script that says, just put it all in retirement. 25 years from now, I get to retire, get to pass it on. And once they start shifting their mindset, they start putting their money to where their values are. So a lot of our clients are charitably minded. If you give your money when you pass, you don't get any tax benefits. But if you give it throughout your life, you get benefits. So it's not to say like some people don't cut back on how much money they earn, but they increase the amount they give. Some people travel, some people do whatever. But it's a non-linear path. It's like, hey, I can do anything. What do I do? The more interesting thing is a lot of times that kind of freaks people out. They get the analysis paralysis, paradox of choice. Like, I can do anything. What do I do? And we see that a lot with our soloists, the single with no kids. Like, okay, I can truly do anything. I don't have a spouse that's stopping me from moving. I can do any job. I can live anywhere. What next? And it's that moment of like, what's the point? And we call it the child-free midlife crisis. When you hit your personal, professional, and financial goals, and you're like, sure, what's the next 40 years of my life look like? And what's the point? And that's a hard question.
Some of the stuff you've mentioned, Jay, actually resonates with me. I remember a conversation I had with my dad some years ago after we sort of come to terms with, childlessness. And my dad's old school. He worked hard to get rid of the debt of the mortgage on the house, and that's what you've got to do. And he'd always quiz me about this sort of stuff. But, he said, you need to get rid of that as soon as you possibly can. What for, Dad? It's managed. It's okay. I'm managing it. Because part of what we used to do as a way of helping with the grief is we'd like to travel, still do. Mm-hmm. And so we're managing all our finances. But to him, that was like, what? And I said to him, Dad, you got to look at this from a different perspective, right? I know that you and Mum want to leave, the three of us something when you go. I know that. That's what you want to do. But what am I going to do? And you could see the look on his face where he had nothing to come back with that because he just didn't get it. And then talking about that, the living part of what you said earlier is my wife and I are now doing that. We're looking at, okay, we're not going to work for the rest of our lives. What are we going to do? When can we retire? So we can see when we can retire, and that's when we are. Because we have the freedom. We've recognised we've got the freedom. Sometimes you can't see it, but we've got to a point now, like you said, Sarah, there's phases. And we've got to a phase now where we can see the freedom that we're going to have.
Let me mess with your dad a little bit more. By the way, because it's always interesting your parents' reactions to all this. That we could do a whole episode on what our parents thought. But for our clients, we talk a lot about buying a house versus renting. We'll tell them to rent. And that goes against like every financial text. But what it is if you're going to move every 2-3 years, it makes no sense to buy a house. Buying a house is a choice for child-free people, not a requirement. Buying a house is part of that standard life script. We call it the American dream, the house, the white picket fence, 2.5 kids, the dog, all that. You're not living that. Maybe you don't. So my wife and I, we sold our house a year and a half ago or so. We rent. Why? Because I can't tell you where I'm going to be living in the next 2-3 years. And if I like this city, we can rent somewhere else. We can go. And interestingly enough, if you do the math on it, people say, well, renting's throwing away money. Not really if you're going to be moving regularly. Because if you don't have to stay in the community for the school systems or, family, whatever it is, you can do it. The editor for my book, her and her dog live in a different Airbnb each month across the U.S. Just don't have a house really. Just, hey, where are you this month? I'm over here. Like, that's just a different way of life. And I will tell you, Michael, that's where a lot of parents, our parents in that case, are really confused when you say, well, I'm not going to own a house. But it's just a different way of life, and it works for us.
I love that observation because it's something that has been on my mind lately with where I live. It's a city that's very in demand. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. And actually, there's a planning application going on, which is ridiculous. And I'm kind of doing a bit to kind of help out with it, but my general feeling, it's interesting that the people that are really kind of like protesting about it, they've got children or they've spent quite a bit on their house and this is where their home is. And I live here and I love the street and I've lived here for a while and it's great. But I'm thinking, just move. I don't need to be here for a school. I don't have that. I actually, and it's true. I mean, on the principle of kind of like it's really poor development and really poor planning and poor design, I would protest. But actually, if it did go through in some form that wasn't great, put the house on the market and I'll go somewhere. I'm okay with that. Rent for a bit and see what falls. Providing they take the dog, it's okay. But it is a myth, isn't it? I think that is that thing. You have to own a house, but if you've got nobody to. I'm just wondering, one thing that's popped into my head as I'm talking about this is that there is, I suspect, also probably another complexity if you own things and have lots of things, that when we end up looking at things like care, if we look at that, if we looked at things, like dying, I mean, let's be blunt, it's guaranteed to happen. There's more complexity if we have more things, perhaps. Maybe is that an area that you talk about with your clients, Jay, about that kind of coming to the end of life? I know it's of interest to us, of interest to Sarah with her death dealer training as well. I'd be curious to hear your views.
It's actually been probably the hardest problem to solve, at least in the U.S., because of legal issues. In the U.S., everything is based on next of kin. So, like, who makes medical decisions for you? Next of kin. Who makes financial decisions? Next of kin. Like, it's just, okay, cool. Well, the number we use is something like a third of child-free folks will never marry. So there's a lot of soloists. So you don't even have a spouse. So your spouse isn't there to make decisions for you. And you don't have next of kin. It starts breaking the system. Yeah, the items, all that. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of child-free folks that are kind of like minimalists. They're like, no, I don't need all that crap. Like, I mean, what do I need the hutch with the china? Okay, like I inherited 3 china sets. What am I supposed to do with 3 china sets? Okay, like I can't even microwave them. Can't put them in the dishwasher. These are useless to me. But we've been working on for the past 3 years a solution, and hopefully, kind of next year we'll be able to roll it out, that we'll be able to serve as child-free people's executor and power of attorney to make decisions for them when they can't. Which long-term care in the U.S. is a whole issue. Got to pay for it. That's one issue, but that's money. Like, we can make that happen. The bigger question is, like, okay, who, if my wife is getting a car crash, who makes our medical decisions? Who makes our financial decisions? And who lets our dog out? Like, these are things your next of kin would normally do, but you don't think about it. If we're in the hospital, my wife's going to be more worried about Colt, our English Mastiff, getting out than she is going to be in the hospital. And these are the types of things people don't think about. Like, well, hopefully you have friends or nephews or other people you can rely on. But there are a lot of folks that don't. There's a lot of people, especially in the child-free community, that chose not to have kids because of family, either family trauma, family issues, family relations, different things. Okay, cool. If that's where they came from, they're probably not going to rely on them to make decisions for you. There's all of these issues that are built into the system. And it's all, give money to the next generation. They're going to make decisions for me. Like, it just compounds. I don't know where it is, how it is out your way, but it's a big issue that we're going to have to fix really quickly.
Yeah. I think, actually, Jay, it's something I'm very interested in. As Berenice mentioned, I'm training to be an end-of-life doula. And one of the things that consistently comes up for me, my own fears, is who will advocate for me, who will look after as you say, the things you don't think about. Who's going to look after my cats if something happens? And okay, I've got a partner, but if something happens to him before me, that's a real concern, because you're only one significant relationship away from being kind of, who do I rely on? And I think over here in the UK, somebody has wonderfully put a comment in. Over here in the UK, we've got Aging Well Without Children, which is like a community. And that is a hot topic at the moment. And I think we are starting to, perhaps those of us that are getting a bit older are starting to think about these things and go, well, what does it look like? What plans can I put in place? So you sort of mentioned that you're thinking about this. What would it be, like an organisation or just a plan for people?
Yep. So what we're doing is we're actually building something we call the Child-Free Trust. We've partnered with a trust company, which in the U.S., that's essentially a bank that just does, management of people's stuff. They're a fiduciary. They're legally required to check through it. And that's been one of the issues. We've been working with regulators for 9 months now, trying to get it all through the process. But that company will serve as executor, power of attorney, all that. But the hardest part then becomes, all right, we got the company to do it, but how do we make sure the information's up to date? Like, our dog has special needs, man. He's got allergies. You need to have that information. We know who the pet walker is. Like, we need to know all that besides what happens to your stuff. But what's going to happen is we will be able to help people with their finances, their life. And then we'll partner with the trust company who will actually, 1-800 trust company essentially. And that's your emergency contact, because it's such a big issue. we actually hired a team of interns, legal interns for a summer, and said, okay, we have 50 states, go look at their answer. Every state had a different answer of like, how do you handle it? How do you do it? Like some states you can hire somebody, some states you can't. Like it's a giant mess in the US and it has not been addressed. It's taken me 3 years to find a solution and we're hopefully going to launch it kind of January 2025. But it's so hard because we haven't kind of struggled through it. The answer a lot of folks are going is like they do kind of like Golden Girls home. 3 friends, we'll all take care of each other. That works fine for the first 2 friends. The last one is out of luck. You're talking about with your partner. If you're the last one, like,
yeah.
And, sure, once you die, like your stuff, I don't know what you care about as much, but I do care about my pets. I do care about some of the decisions made. The bigger one is like, okay, who makes the decision to say, hey, it's time for you to go to the nursing home. We're going to make sure your care is good. We're going to like make sure you get what you need. I had somebody, I was on a podcast and he explained it this way. His mother's 90 something. She's in a nursing home. She loves chips. And the nurses are like, no, we're not going to give you the chips because it's going to mess up your diet. He's like, give her the damn chips. She's 90 years old. What's it going to do? Cut a month off her time? Mm-hmm. And his question was, who's going to make sure I get my chips? And I'm like, brilliant question. What are those things you care about that somebody's going to make sure? And if you don't have a legal and financial solution, the government's making decisions for you, and I don't care which government you're in. I don't trust them to make my decisions.
Yeah, we've had a lot of horror stories over here because we've got the public trustee, which is a government-appointed person who can do the whole guardianship and finances. But there's a lot of horror stories because they have to perform in a very narrow bandwidth of law that sometimes comes right up against, like you say, who's going to get my chips? A woman here I know in Australia, her one was, who's going to make sure my toenails are cut? In the same respect, it's that person's not going to be coming into the nursing home every day to make sure, okay, what's going on here? Like I've got both my parents in a nursing home now, so I'm acutely aware of this. That if we didn't go in and question what's going on, things will slip. It's the nature of life, I guess. And so we are acutely aware of this at the moment.
And we always get that question: who's going to take care of you when you're older? And I kind of have a love-hate thing with that question because when people ask that, they're implying they're expecting their kids to take care of them. That's a separate discussion. We have a program we call the 8 No Baby Steps. And step 7 is, what's your plan for your parents? Michael, that kind of question of like, what are you willing to care for your parents? How are you willing to financially support them? Are you willing to emotionally support them? But the question is, who's going to support us? And my answer is, your financial plan is with our help. Like, you have to figure out the finances. Like, we're not going to pay your long-term care bill because that's what you have to plan. But we're going to make sure that your toenails are clipped. It sounds silly, but these are the things that matter.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And I don't think anyone's got an answer for it at the moment.
No.
Oh, I get requests from all across the world because, we're as far as we know, one of the only financial firms serving just child-free folks. I get people all across the country, all across the world saying, hey, can you help me in XYZ country? And I'm like, no, first of all, the regulations, US, I have, the laws around this stuff, the regulatory compliance, giant mess. I have a colleague who's looking to start up a firm in the UK, but their rules are making some challenges. Like there's different things. It's just the system is not there to support people without kids. I actually look at it in the financial planning software. The software is not set up to support it. The taxes aren't. It's all of these systemic problems that you don't think about until you're looking at it. And the end of life is just like the blinking red light of what it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sobering. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, there's a comment that says the last person standing is a real crunch point. Yeah, it is. I also wanted just to say that, for me also, the whole thing about pets as well. I think that resonates with I think it's one of those things that you don't I certainly think, oh God, that's just a bit, I don't want to talk about that. But, I can sort of predict that maybe I won't have pets and I'm owned by my dog completely. And to think that I might have a point where I might not have a pet because I would worry that if something happened to me, is kind of depriving not just myself, but it's depriving of a dog in a rescue shelter being given a home, because there isn't an infrastructure there that actually then. Yeah, you talk about things like the software. I hadn't thought of it, but everything is a knock-on effect to something else. It's an enormous problem, and a global one by the sounds of what you're telling us here. It's something that's not facilitated well in any country in the world so far.
Well, I mean, let's be real. There's a lot of countries out there, and most of them don't do a good job taking care of our elderly. That's a separate question. Like, that's a big picture, societal. Some countries are better. We actually, when we work with clients, I've had folks as early in the early 20s. I had somebody 21. The day you come to me at 21, we're doing your estate paperwork. We're like figuring out your guardian for your pets that day. And people are like, well, but I'm 21. I'm like, yeah, you can get hit by a bus too. Like, I mean, like, I hate to be morbid, but like, you are. And Bernice, you brought up a great example, the rescues. One of the things, at least around here, is some of the rescues are willing to be named in your will to take your pet and make sure they're cared for a period, for their life. Like around here, there's actually a place they call the Senior Catio. There's a house owned by the cats, and they have a caregiving team that come in, take care of them. But like you say, hey, my cat goes there. I'm going to give you, it's like $25,000. Give you $25,000. My cat lives out their life in the Senior Catio. This house has like bubbles that go outside so the cats can go like walk outside and back in and all this. Like, I'm not kidding. The cats own the house and everybody comes and takes care of them. But you have to know to specify that.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah, the Dogs Trust in the UK do that. Just in case listeners are wondering, UK Dogs Trust will take in your pet, and I've put a link in our chat and look on the show notes about the Cinnamon Trust, who also do that too. They will support people. But yeah, I love that cat-owned house. They're going to take over, I tell you. Cats.
I think my cat owns our house too, but that's a different question. He just knows that.
Yeah, my experience of being owned by a cat in the past was that the cat was way more likely to take over the house than the dog would, but she'd give it a good shot. Yeah,
nothing wrong with the cat owner. There's nothing wrong with that.
I tell you, I acknowledge the intelligence of the cat versus the dog.
So I took a picture the other day. So nothing. Me and my partner, we have cricket days. So what we do is we move the TV round. We open up patio doors and we sit outside, and we have our chairs out, and they've got padding on them. It's got so bad in my house that the cat sat in it and I couldn't move it. So I sat in a wooden chair. That's how bad it is. When the cat owns you, it's like, okay, yes, you're fine. Stay where you are.
Our dog will miss us. Our cat will go, who's my new food bringer? I'm just saying, like.
Straight.
Servants, humans.
I was going to ask you another question. My brain is sort of really firing on this stuff because I'll be honest, this is kind of part of my motivation for doing the retraining as the end-of-life doula, because I think there's an awful lot of fear around it. In particular, when you talked about the Senior Catio, $25,000, it's like, wow. Not everyone's got $25,000. So I was wondering, is your advice for those of us that don't have that sort of money, is it different, or have you got principles that you would still implement regardless of where we are on the old net worth structure?
Yeah. So in the US, at least, one of the big issues is who's going to pay for your long-term care. And the break point is if you have less than $500,000, you're going to go on Medicaid, which is the federal assistance, and only if you're broke. But you still have to have all the paperwork. So that's part of the problem. And there's the system just breaks down. And when I talk about the soloist, it costs you somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million across your life to be a soloist. So, we call it the single tax. Like, you can't split an apartment with somebody. You can't split the electricity with somebody. Like, it just costs you a lot of money. And when we work with soloists, we've got to have those tough conversations. Now, the problem is, like these legal things with the trust company, all that costs money. And I have no way around it because the legal issues and the compliance, it's just insane what it costs to do that. So you end up with something like Michael was talking about with a public trust, but by states, that's a problem. So the answer is, okay, cool. We put a network of friends together to support each other, a community support network. Awesome concept. If you're going to do that, we call them intentional communities. You got to make sure there's always young blood coming in. If we're all 70 and we're all friends, the numbers just aren't in your favor. You have to have that structure. And I think the challenge there is some people start going, well, am I just like keeping those friends so I have somebody to fill the spot? Or, I had somebody, I'm going to give my nephew some money so hopefully they make good decisions for me. Well, if you look at the number of cases of elder abuse, it's staggering. It's just, I'm in the will, so I'm going to put her in the cheapest home possible so I get more money when I like bad. So you have to find which solution is the least bad. We've been trying to figure this out. And the honest truth is I can't serve everybody at the price points that I provide service because of just legalese. I mean, what it costs us from the requirements. And I've been trying to find ways to serve people cheaper. We've been jokingly talking about, but we're honestly, we want to create like an AARP for child-free folks. And those don't know AARP, that's the US's like senior group. They get all together, they vote together, they provide support, they provide discounts. We need to ultimately get there. We're not there. And sometimes the answer is I just don't have an answer besides getting all your paperwork done, getting it all written, getting the best you can. But, you're going to have to make some tough choices about how you do it. And the other thing that happens is for the soloists, often people rely on their spouse to kind of provide the first line support. Well, if you don't have that, you've got to get help earlier. And if you don't have the money, it's this cycle that just becomes this problem that is way beyond the four of us trying to figure out. I mean, it's a societal issue. I was watching the Child Free Convention. They had two gentlemen in there talking about India and Pakistan and families and multi-generational homes. And, the multi-generational home helps. But when they were child-free, they got kicked out. I'm not part of that system anymore because I'm not putting on the next kid. I don't know, Sarah. You're going to have to probably lean in somewhere and help try to fix this because there's no solution.
I think it's really tricky, isn't it? I think it's looking at all those different systems and not one single, country systems. Not one single country seems to be addressing kind of the elephant or the ticking time bomb, if you like, in the room, in terms of the fact that we have a generation of us coming through that you said, I think it was basically 25% of us don't have children, don't have a sort of a next generation to rely on. So this is only going to get bigger, I think. I think Jodie Day talks about stats. There's going to be more of us as time goes on. And it's just being ignored, isn't it, really? Or just brushed under the carpet or, we don't want to deal with that. It's a bit difficult. So it's kind of incumbent, isn't it, on us to deal with it?
I think one of the problems is I know you two have heard this before, but if you're not counted, you're not seen. And so, for instance, at the very basic level in Australian census, for example, there's no question about are you childless or are you child-free? There's no question about that. It's just family, how many kids you got. And so if you're not seen, then the government's going to have no idea.
Yeah.
Have no idea at all. And so I think that's a fundamental problem, is the fact that they may not even know we exist, perhaps.
So there's some groups now talking about child-free, childless folks getting into politics and kind of making their voices heard. Let's be real. If you're using U.S. numbers, I think it's pretty close, 25%. If 25% of folks started voicing together, they'll be heard.
Yeah.
Now, the U.S. Census looked at childless adults. They were specifically looking at had you given biological birth or not. And they found that in adults over 55 who are childless, 2.5% got any financial support from their family. So that's like nothing, 2.5%. In the same population of adults over 55, they looked at parents. 1.5% of them got any support from their family. So in actuality, parents got less support than the childless folks. So it's not just us. But you're right, Michael. One of the issues, so when I started my firm, one of the big questions was like, well, how many people are out there? And the Pew Research just put out a study, earlier this year. Michigan State's done a couple of them. The Doctors Neal out of Michigan State, they've set up a set of questions, 3 questions around, do you have kids? Did you want kids? Are you ever planning on having kids? Like where you can get some of that data. I went to one of the big groups that does financial surveys, kind of like debt and all that. I said, hey, can you ask some questions about this? And I went around and around with them for quite a while on their executive team. They said, well, we have a question. Do you have any dependents? And I'm like, that's not the question. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes in. Do you have dependents or not? Are they here right now? Are they empty nest? That's not the question. The question is, do you have kids? Are you ever going to have kids? They're like, well, why does that change things? And I'm like, this is the problem, And in the financial world, I spend about half my time talking to child-free folks about the finances, half talking to the financial people about child-free folks. In the financial world, I was at a conference. Gentleman gets up there, very well known in the financial community, and he says, well, working with people without kids is the worst. I'm like, hold up, what did you just say? And what he meant to say was estate planning for child-free folks is a challenge, change a lot of things I just stated, but that was not what he said. And I went to the conference organizers because they have this whole thing about inclusivity and, judgment and bullying. I said, one of your speakers just said this. And they said to me, well, he should have worded it better. I'm like, let me just wonder, if he had said, working with women is the worst, your whole conference would have shut down. Or working with X minority or what, but working with people without kids is the worst. We're okay with that statement. And that's the problem. We're second-class citizens, and Michael might be right because they don't realize it. I'm over here going, look, 25% of the U.S. is child-free. As far as I know, we're the only firm dedicated to serving child-free people. From a financial standpoint, that's dumb. There should be hundreds of financial firms out there serving people who have money, who want specific services, but they're not. Follow the money. 25% of the U.S. and they have money. That's what your brain just starts exploding when you start thinking about it. My next book, The Child Free Guide, Life and Money, the publisher is like, why aren't there any money books for people without kids? There's money for parents. There's money for, why isn't there a book? And I'm like, I don't know, but we'll fill the hole. But 25% of the population, again, not served. These are the types of things you run into. And yes, I'm pretty passionate about it. If you can
I
get
love it.
That's good. That's fantastic. I mean, it feels like I kind of want to ask the question that if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, as I'm feeling, hell yeah, I'm going to do something. What collectively? And we talked about politics. We've talked about that. I mean, I know our local MP is pretty proactive about some stuff. This probably isn't on his radar. What can we do? What collectively could we do as an act? Where next? Because it feels like there's something that needs to happen. Obviously, lots of things need to happen. It's a bit hard to work out where to start. And I'm sure that's maybe a question that you've asked yourself a few times, Jay. But what can we do as people sitting, listening to this, going, well, what do I do? What can I make? Yeah. How can I do all this? Make this a thing that is recognised? Because individually, I think sometimes we can we can do little things in silos. Collectively, we have more power if we have more voices. What collectively could we possibly do as listeners to the full stop?
So I think one of the things we just need to start doing is we need to start talking to people outside our community. You mentioned Jody Day, Sarah, and I had a great conversation with her, and she's done phenomenal things within the childless community. She's also getting out and talking to the public. I do a lot of work in the press. I went and talked to a reporter, and I pitched in the child-free stuff, and he says to me, well, I need to check with my editor because I'm not sure I can use the word child-free in print. And I was like, what do you mean? He says, well, it's like the word suicide. We're worried people will do it. And I was like, ooh, there's a lot to unpack there. But we need to start talking to the wider public, because what I find is, I actually had a feature article on us in Wall Street Journal, and somebody reached out to me afterwards. And he says, I did not know this is me, but this is me, and I need the help. People don't even know to Google child-free, childless, or whatever it is. They don't even know the terms. And within our communities, we're doing a lot of talk. But even the largest child-free or childless communities have a couple 100,000 people. The child-free subreddit has 1.5 million people. Well, 1.5 million people out of the overall population is nothing, because we're talking within ourselves, which is great, but we need to be talking outside to everybody. And I think that's part of the discussion. One of the things we've been looking at, I'm working with a PR firm, working on publishing for the book. There's never been a child-free book on the New York Times bestseller list. Well, things like that make an impact. For International Child-Free Day last year, we sponsored a billboard in Times Square, just celebrating that the day exists and celebrating what our life is like. That, by the way, on social media got a whole bunch of negative posts, but that's okay. But we're getting the word out there. There's a group in the U.S. Called the New Legacy Institute. They're working on policies and procedures around this, especially around leave and work policies and healthcare. We need to be talking to everybody. We're doing a whole initiative to go out and do speaking at companies. I talked to a company, they're actually at Canada. They got 120,000 employees, and they have an LGBT group, and they have a Mama Bear group and a Papa Bear group. I said, have you talked to your child-free or childless folks? And they go, no, we haven't. I go, okay, 25% of your staff you don't support. It's these conversations that we need to start having, and we need to come out of the shadows. I go out and do a lot of talking about this, and people come to me after and go, I'm childless or I'm child-free. And it's in the whisper. I'm like, no, it's okay to say, I am, I'm okay. I'm not better. I'm not worse. I'm just different. And that's okay.
I'm feeling like there's a podcast here that gets everyone who should be talking about this together, and that the Full Stop could facilitate that just get everyone in the room to talk about it.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about, isn't there? We're literally just scratching the surface, really, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, aren't we? One of those themes, isn't it? There's so many micro themes within childlessness that we've found in the podcast. Recording this now, we're episode 66, 67, that there is just so many micro issues. But this is the one that's the guaranteed gonna hit most people in some form in our community. Lots of things don't always resonate, but this is everybody, really. It's hard to think of anyone who wouldn't be part of it. But it's incredible how that exclusion also works as well in terms of language. I've never heard of that with the child-free not being able to be put in print. That is wow, isn't it? I wonder if that's a US thing. I've not heard it in the UK, but I do wonder if that's kind of like that political kind of scene going on there now. This where childless and child-free are being tainted by other people's opinions who don't experience what we experience. That's quite shocking.
Yeah, that reporter was actually out of Canada, so it makes it even more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, yes, in the U.S. right now, we are in the childless cat lady discussions, and it's a big deal. Yeah. So we've tracked it. About a third of our introductory meetings with clients end up in tears. And I was like, what's going on? In the financial world, that's really weird. So I started asking them, what's going on? And here's what they said. They said it was the first time they felt heard and seen. I mean, talk about power. And that's what we're missing is just people like us talking to us, just supporting us. And I think we need to, kind of have our own pride movement of hey, we're here. We're happy with who we are. We didn't all pick the path we got there. That's a different question. But we're happy with where we're at, and we are not weird for not having kids.
I get that a lot as well, Jay. When people first reach out, it's like they've never spoken to somebody that doesn't have kids. And there's almost like a relief. It's like, oh, thank God. Where have you been?
Yep.
So I think...
we get a lot of that.
It is, isn't it? It's kind of like, oh, there is something out there for me then. I'm not on my own doing this, whether that's finances, mental health, whatever. It's a big deal.
It's that lived experience, isn't it? You offer, it's your lived experience. It's my lived experience, however it looks like, and the path to it. Those labels, those words. I hate the word labels, but that kind of that lived experience resonates, and it's just cathartic to know that you're not going into a space where you're going to be judged because the person you're talking to isn't on the same wavelength.
We always tell people, if you're going to talk to a financial planner and it's not us, that's cool. Ask them how your plan is different because you're child-free or childless. And we tracked it. We actually did a survey on this. Number one answer they get is, oh, you'll change your mind. And I'm like, okay, so I was presenting at the Financial Therapy Association meeting, which is probably the most inclusive group I've ever met. It's the financial group that gives hugs. Okay, like awesome. And I presented on child-free folks, and a group stopped me afterwards and said, hey, great talk. I want to ask you some questions. I said, okay, fine. So I sit down at their table, have a conversation, and they asked me a really important question. They said, is it okay to ask our clients if they're child-free? And I said to them, I said, well, do you ask your clients if they're LGBTQ+? And they said, no, we allow them to self-identify. I'm like, just saying, probably the same thing. You know, it's better to let people self-identify and work through this. So then we were talking for a minute later. I said, okay, let's say somebody does self-identify as gay. Do you ever ask them why? They go, no, I never would. I'm like, guess what? If somebody self-identifies as child-free, you don't ask why. If they want to self-identify and want to share, that's fine. But it's even just that basic language. And here's a group of therapists going, I never thought about any of that. Like, I don't know how to approach it. I don't know what, and like, at least we're starting the conversation, you know, because I mean, like, there's a lot of stuff that comes with that. I don't know about you all, but if you say, hey, you're child-free or childless, you know, there's a different reaction of child-free versus childless. If you said child-free, they go, well, why? It's the next question. You're like, none of your business. You know, in our case, my wife's got a 50-50 chance of dying if she gets pregnant. Whether that makes us childless, child-free, or like, I'm not even getting into that. I'll tell people that, and then they go, oh, I shouldn't have asked that question. I'm like, no, you shouldn't have. Like, seriously. And that's the challenge, is unfortunately, we're one of the few groups it's still okay to judge in some eyes. And that's not right.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that's resonated with me now is, as the girls will tell you, I'm quite passionate about talking about, particularly as we get older. And one of the things I find really interesting is that if I'm talking to people who identify as childless in their 30s and early 40s, they're not switched on to this. And usually it's not until they have to care for another person, usually a parent, that it's like the light comes on. Yeah, it's interesting dynamics.
And the care for parents, kind of fun one. We call this the child-free bingo, which is financial bingo, which is like, hey, you don't have kids, so you can take care of mom. Like it's like one sentence, like especially a big deal for the soloists, where the single folks are like, oh, well, you can move in with mom. You don't have kids. You have not, you know, no. And employers, oh, well, you don't have a family. You don't need Christmas off. No, like it's just the language and the stuff. And, you know, I can hate on my own financial folks because they're probably the worst example of it. They're, you know, we joking, they're old, stale, pale, and gray and male. Like, I mean, like they're just old white men and they haven't had a new thought in forever. And the judgments and the discussion, it's just terrible. And Michael, you're right that it does hit later in life. You know, we tend to see people kind of mid-40s. It's kind of like that sweet spot where they're hitting that second half of life. They're like, what do I do? Where do I go? That's like our ideal client profile. And then they're like, oh, these are big issues I need to address. Yeah. How do I find people that can help me address them? And they go, you know, going back to financial planners, we look at data, the advice they've been getting is bad. And it's like, you know, okay, how do I find somebody who can help me with my aging parents and help me with their financials for them and help me with my finance? Like, it's a big deal. And I don't know how we change that conversation because I'll tell you right now, I can't serve everybody. You know, I want thousands of people out there serving child-free folks. You know, my firm's small. We're, you know, even if we like kick it out of the ballpark, we serve people usually about $1 million net worth. There's about 4.4 million child-free millionaires out there. If we do phenomenally, we'll serve 1% of that. That's 44,000 people. That's a lot of people, but it's still 1% of the population. Like, and millionaires are only 20% of the like. We got 90% of the population of child-free folks not being addressed because there's systemic problems.
because I was thinking too that the fact that they maybe come to a financial advisor probably at too late, perhaps, in terms of trying to amass wealth, which should have been started maybe 10, 15 years earlier. I don't know. It's just things that are coming to mind for me.
Well, interestingly enough, we spend more time talking to our clients about spending money than saving money. Because if you want to die with zero, wind down your wealth, you actually have to shift the way you plan your money. The way we say it for me and my wife is our nephews get what's left over. If they get 10 grand or 100 grand, that's fine. If they get $1 million, we made a mistake. We should have given that to them earlier, because if we're 90 and passed it on to them at 60, they don't need it then. They needed it earlier in their life. And what happens is, Michael, that awareness about amassing money, that's not a priority for a lot of child-free folks. Okay, well, but you want to plan to care for your parents, and you want to take care of your pets, and you want to, all these other things that change. And there's even just basics like life insurance. Not a big deal for child-free folks, especially if you're single. There's almost no need for life insurance. But everybody says, I have to have it. It's all of these things that shift that people don't even realize, even if they are child-free. Because, Michael, I'm willing to bet if I sat down with you and your wife, you'd realize you could probably cut back on work earlier and maybe not retire the way you want. Because one of the challenges is, what happens if you retire? Then what do you do? Eventually you run out of places to go visit. People are like, I have a travel list. I'm like, yeah, about 7 years later, you run out of places to visit. I have clients once I'm sending you to Antarctica and Patagonia and some of those places, we're out of places to visit. You have to figure out what's the point of your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We've been doing his plans. I mean, literally, the podcast is just going to be the full stop's going to be just I don't know. We're counting down the days with Michael.
I don't think Michael's going to be bored.
Yeah, I really don't think. No, I'm going to get little text messages saying, "I had an idea," as he's somewhere in transit somewhere, and I'll just have to kind of block him after a while.
Who are you?
Yeah,
what do you want?
Yeah, well, I don't know you anymore.
but talking about those phase changes, this is actually something that Vicky and I have been very purposeful about. Is that what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And so we've got the freedom to do those things. So, yeah, we've done don't need to talk about it now, but we've done a lot of stuff that's setting us up for that time. Yeah.
So the question is not what do you want to retire from, but what do you want to retire to? And what happens for child-free folks is most parents, when they hit their goals, whether it's their work goal, their retirement goal, whatever, they shift their goals onto their kids. We can have a separate discussion if that's right or not, but Johnny has to go to college, has to go to the Ivy League, has to go whatever. When you're child-free or childless, the question becomes, what impact do you want to make on the world? Which is a good question. And here's the test. And Sarah, you're gonna love this because it's going to fit right where we're going. I ask my clients, what's the second line of their obituary? So the first line of your obituary says, so-and-so died at this age, at this location. The second line usually says, father of 3, leaves behind, blah, blah, blah. But as child-free folks, what's that second line? And I've actually spent a lot of time reflecting on this for myself. And I've reworded it a bunch of times, but I said, okay, it'll say loving husband, world traveler, author, and innovator. Well, those are my targets right now. By the way, those will probably shift. But what's that second line of your obituary say? And when you ask people that question, they go, I have no freaking clue. And I'm like, cool, let's figure that out. Because if I don't know what I want that second line to say, I'm just wandering. And it doesn't have to be oh, they were the best executive or up the ladder. Mine's not necessarily about that, but it's how do I make those impact? And then you make sure your money goes with it and your life goes with it. It's a great exercise. Sarah, it's one of those I'm sure you've seen before, but it's awesome for childless folks.
You know what I was going to say? I love it because we were sort of talking about it in my training, but not in that way. And I think that second line of the obituary is brilliant because it's just so snappy, isn't it? I think mine's going to be, hasn't left a pot to piss in, because I'm really with you, Jay. I'm not leaving anything. That's going to be a failure if I leave anything. I want to be down to my last
I did the exercise
pint of beer, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, I did the exercise with a client, and they said their impact, their second line was they had the best garden and improved the community around them.
Yeah.
Awesome. It doesn't have to be, New York Times bestseller, blah, blah, whatever. It can be whatever you want. But what happens is the standard script says the second line is left behind 3 kids, you left behind. Okay, cool. Take the time to figure out the answer. And Sarah, you'll have to write back to me when you're done. Try it with a couple of clients. You're going to realize most of them go, "Oh, that's a hard one. I have no clue." And there's so much meat there to think through. And it's like, that's the stuff that we, as child-free and childless folks, can actually help parents think about. Because parents just follow the default path. If we're in our 40s going, what's the second line of our obituary? Like, I mean, that's way, they don't usually get that there until empty nest or whatever else. Like, we're way early in our life trying to figure out what the point of life is. That's that self-actualization stuff. And my argument is, without knowing what that is, I can't make you a financial plan. Sarah, I can make your financial plan to, last dollar bounce on the way out. I'm good with that. Like, I know how to do that, but I need to know that's the goal.
Yeah. That's so true. I really love that empty nest thing, because I say that to an awful lot of people I do workshops with. It's kind of like they get the empty nest that much further on and go, right, what am I doing now that my kids have moved out? Now what? Whereas we get it a lot sooner and go, right, okay, what am I doing now? I think it's a really key part of getting past or through childlessness, because you need to work out who you are and where you want to go. And I think your financial identity is wrapped up in that too.
That bit where you don't quite know where you want to go is that awful hinterland that we've all probably been there, where you're like, and it's driven by grief, but it's also that there actually isn't kind of like a manual for that.
Yep.
If you knew you had a thing that you could aim towards, or that there was support, I think that would probably alleviate, maybe some of those insecurities and the worries in that. I just call it a hinterland thing. I don't want to go back to the second line of the obituary, because one of the things that I don't know if this is a thing that maybe other people do, or it's just a quirk with me. It could be a quirk with me, but when I go to in parks and you have benches and you've got brass plaques on them, and I often think, what would I have on my plaque if I had a bench? What would I write on it? It gets I'm not sure that councils in the UK allow swearing, but I kind of I don't know, I started thinking about that quite a long time ago. What would I put on the bench? What would I want people to remember me for on a bench? Because I'm quite determined I don't want a funeral. I think they're awful things, and probably no one would turn up, but which would be embarrassing. But yeah, that whole kind of idea of what do you want to be known for? I love that second line of the obituary. It ties into that.
That is bloody brilliant. I always used to say to people, for me, I always used to say that I want lots of people to turn up to my funeral, because then that is a measure of, did I make an impact? But I think your line, Jay, is absolutely, that's just taken it to the next level. That is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So I was working with a client who he's a sports person. I have to make it vague, and very well known in his industry. And I said, okay, so as your second line, you were this rock star in your sports industry. And he goes, no. I go, okay, well, what is it? He goes, well, he was a good man who helped others. Well, that's interesting, because like your Wikipedia page will say, the sports industry, but what does it mean to be a good man? And how do you make that impact? Like, great question. Now, my one caution to you, if you're still going through the grieving process, you're not ready for this question of like, what's that obituary look like?
Yeah.
I 100%. And we, for our clients, we'll even tell them, hey, if you're still going through the grieving process, you're still trying to conceive, we're not the right place for you, because we're forward looking. We're trying to do it. The first half of my book is all about life planning. What do you want to do with your life? If you have not gotten through the grieving process, go see Sarah first. Like, go work through it. And when you're ready, we can help you. And I think that you need to make some space for that. You three seem to be close, well enough along that you're going, oh, okay, that's a good question. I want to ask. Be careful. Others, oh no, because like we're just not there yet. But it's actually a good litmus test of like, where are you in your process? Where are you in your life? What, are you ready for the next chapter? I had a conversation with somebody, and she was childless about 5 years ago. She had decided, hey, it's never going to happen. Still finishing through the grieving process. She's like, these are great questions. I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
Awesome awareness.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would be, I know that we've talked about this before in other episodes, but that anger state as well. I absolutely know that when if I sat and tried to write that, I couldn't have done, because actually everything would have been around anger. I would have probably, it wouldn't have settled with me, but yeah, and that's a measure perhaps of a progression of coming to terms with the state, perhaps, of where we are. Something popped into my head then about, no, it's gone. Shattered. I'm absolutely shattered, Jay, because I was doing stuff. So apologies. I can't remember what it was. Michael, you can take that bit out. I've forgotten what the question was. It was something about grief. Oh, I know what it was. It's come back into my head, and it was talking about something we were talking separately in a conversation we had privately about kind of our identities and things. And it just chimed with what you just said there, Sarah, about financial identity and how we perceive ourselves as well, and what perhaps wealth looks like to us. But I also think as well that maybe perhaps there comes a point in that writing of that obituary where somebody may not ever touch on the word childlessness, child-free, non-parenting. It would be something different. I'm thinking back to the sports person being a good man and sport not coming into it, and how actually sometimes I certainly felt in the first few years of the podcast that I was a childless, and then I was a designer and I did this other thing, and they've completely reversed now. Yeah. Absolutely reversed. In the childless is the thing that's over there somewhere. That's personal to me, very much my personal reflection on where I am. But I would think that do many of your clients, would they ever go back and say, okay, I identify to the end as being childless? Is that a commonality, or is that something that just goes with the idea of having a plan?
We had our staff together. We got we're all over the U.S. and we got together, and our CEO had asked the group, like, where in your introductions do you use the word child-free or childless when you're like meeting people at a party? And the answer was, we don't. Kind of like, it's not, it's not what I start with. Yes, because I'm the founder of Child Free Wealth, that word's going to come out pretty quick, but it's not the identity. And I think at some point you start going, okay, cool. I'm a designer. I'm whatever I am. My new thing is I want people to, you're at a party. Hey, Michael, nice to meet you. What impact do you want to make on the world? Where you can have the conversation about what matters. Because let's be real, what Michael does for a living doesn't matter. It's kind of cool, but we're not our job. We're not childless. We are so much more than that. I think you're right. If I looked at people's obituaries, it's not going to say child free or childless. There'll be a hole there. You'll see, because it doesn't say left behind, whatever. But what was that hole filled with, or what was their life lived, and how do they look at that? And that's where it's like, oh, okay. One of our company, one of our biggest marketing issues, if you Google child-free financial planning, we're like 7 out of the first 10 responses. But people don't know to Google child-free financial planning. This don't know, or childless, or whatever term you want to use. What happens is people just don't even know that exists. Mm-hmm. It's part of them, but it's not their identity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a ban on that has to be, doesn't there, about that whole thing about going into anywhere and someone just literally identifying with that question. It comes up so much, I think, in conversations about identity, and going into mixed situations where you have parents and non-parents, kind of, to shorthand for all of us who don't have children, but that, do you have kids, and how you respond to that. And actually, maybe that's one of the answers, is to get in there first. And just literally with the question, what impact do you want to make on the world? Something else. Literally turn it around and get in with your question before they do.
I've got a question. Jay, you talked about your book a lot. Where can people find it?
Free Guide to Life and Money. It's on pre-order everywhere. I mean, really you can do it on Amazon, but I prefer you do your local bookstore and ask them to carry it. It comes out at the end of the year. A lot of the topics we've been talking about are in there. So this is one of those weird financial books that the first half talks about life. And that's because of these issues. The first half of the book ends with, what is your legacy? You're not leaving a genetic legacy. So we're starting with the big questions. And then, by the way, how do we do investing and all that? That's the second part of it. It's the least important. And that's what really messes with people's heads.
I was going to say, wow.
That was a big issue. That was a big episode.
It really was. I think you might be on mute, Berenice. You're chatting, but I can't hear you.
Sorry, that was pain.
You didn't know that.
Sorry.
You just thought they were talking over you.
I know. I was like, well, they're rude. I just wanted to say, I just love this. Thank you, Jay, for being here so early, and just so much that I've taken away. The one thing that really, really just resonates with me out of everything is that idea of having some kind of movement. You said about Pride movement, we've talked about exclusions. I absolutely firmly believe that there needs to be a movement of, and I think it is a coming together of childlessness and child-free. I think that's the way to kind of, we can riff off each other. I feel very much personally, that's not representative of the full stop, but my personal feeling is that there's got to be, I think, a movement, and we can be so powerful. We've got so much to share and so much there. It's my activism and rebellion coming through, and I really want to take that away and sit with that and feel an empowerment from it. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
It's been amazing. I feel like there's so much that we've covered in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So, Sarah, you started with the questions kind of like, well, how is it different in the financial world or whatever? And I'm like, it changes everything. Like I literally did a article for financial planners, and it was originally named like 15 things that being child-free changed in your financial plan. And I kept running after 15. Like I had more and more. And once you start seeing it, you can't stop. And that's the challenge. And Berenice, you're on that page. Like once you start doing the activism, be careful, because it's something you can't stop because you see it everywhere.
Oh yeah, I think as soon as we started this podcast, you start to see it everywhere. Become hyper aware of it, and in doing so, I think that's one of the things that I took away, because we're going to the Story House in Chester in the UK in a little while, 20 days until Michael flies over here at the date of recording. And one thing that I was sort of trying to not warn people about was just like, once you start, you can't stop, but also be aware of your own boundaries, be aware of your mental health, and that people, sadly, pockets of society can disappoint, and that can be hard, and it's important to have people around you, whether that's our online community, whether it's another community somewhere that can just give you that kind of like, it's okay, we're going to support you, because it can be really, I think, quite sobering, I think, to be in that position. Activism's fantastic, but be aware that there can be disappointments along the way. But that's not to say you shouldn't do it, but just be careful. Lots
of comments coming in, Joe. Thanks for the discussion. Lots to ponder, lots to think about. Very thought-provoking and interesting. So I think you've really sort of lit a touch paper here on something that doesn't get talked about very much. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We'd love to catch up with you at a later date and to follow up on this conversation, because I think there's so much more work to be done. And yeah, maybe we need to get some people in a podcast room, and
that would be amazing.
Get some brain stirrings.
What we need to do, I've done this with a couple people. We've done like an Instagram live where we take questions from the audience, and man, there's some power in that group of talking about it, and more than just like the four of us going, okay, this resonates. No, you start seeing others and it resonating with. It's just got a power in numbers and people and shared stories.
Yeah, there's the beginnings of it in our chat here that we can see. People feeling, okay, things to do. Yeah, and lots of love and thanks for that too.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jay, for getting up early. Really appreciate your time, and it's been it's been great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening. And we'd love to hear your feedback on the topic. And you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, X and LinkedIn, or you can find our contact details at our website www.thefullstoppod.com, where you can also sign up for our listeners list, where you can keep up to date with what's going on in our part of the community. You may have a burning topic that you think we haven't covered, so please reach out to us, as we would like to be as inclusive and diverse as possible. You can also sign up for our inclusive online community. The website will fill you in and show you what goes on the inside. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone.